Good afternoon and welcome back to another episode of The Longing, where today we will be continuing to read Moby Dick. So let's get going, shall we? Read a book, Moby Dick. Better turn to now, said the captain with a heartless jeer. Shut us up again, will ye? Cried Steelkilt. Oh, certainly, said the captain, and the key clicked. It was at this point, gentlemen, that enraged by the defection of 7 of his former associates, and stung by the mocking voice that had last hailed him, and maddened by his long entombment in a place as black as the bowels of despair, it was then that Steelkilt proposed to the 2 Canallers, thus far apparently of one mind with him, to burst out of their hole at the next summoning of the garrison, and armed with their keen mincing knives, long crescentic heavy implements with a handle at each end, run amuck from the bowsprit to the taffrail, and if by any devilishness of desperation possible, seize the ship. For himself he would do this, he said, whether they joined him or not. That was the last night he should spend in that den. But the scheme met with no opposition on the part of the other 2. They swore they were ready for that, or for any other mad thing, for anything in short but a surrender. And what was more, they each insisted upon being the first man on deck when the time to make the rush should come. But to this their leader as fiercely objected, reserving that priority for himself, particularly as his 2 comrades would not yield the one to the other in the matter, and both of them could not be first, for the latter would but admit 1 man at a time. And here, gentlemen, the foul play of these miscreants must come out. Upon hearing the frantic project of their leader, each in his own separate soul had suddenly lighted, it would seem, upon the same piece of treachery, namely, to be foremost in breaking out, in order to be the first of the 3, though the last of the 10, to surrender, and thereby secure whatever small chance of pardon such conduct might merit. But when Steelkilt made known his determination still to lead them to the last, they in some way, by some subtle chemistry of villainy, mixed their before secret treacheries together, and when their leader fell into a doze, verbally opened their souls to each other in 3 sentences, and bound the sleeper with cords and gagged him with cords, and shrieked out for the captain at midnight. Thinking murder at hand, and smelling in the dark for the blood, he and all his armed mates and harpooneers rushed for the forecastle. In a few minutes the scuttle was opened, and, bound hand and foot, the still struggling ringleader was shoved up into the air by his perfidious allies, who at once claimed the honour of securing a man who had been fully ripe for murder. But all these were collared and dragged along the deck like dead cattle, and, side by side, were seized up into the mizzen rigging, like 3 quarters of meat, and there they hung till morning. Damn ye, cried the captain, pacing to and fro before them. The vultures would not touch ye, ye villains. At sunrise he summoned all hands, and separating those who had rebelled from those who had taken no part in the mutiny, he told the former that he had a good mind to flog them all round. Thought upon the whole he would do so. He ought to. Justice demanded it. But, for the present, considering their timely surrender, he would let them go with a reprimand, which he accordingly administered in the vernacular. But as for you, ye carrion rogues, turning to the 3 men in the rigging, for you I mean to mince ye up for the tripods, and, seizing a rope, he applied it with all his might to the backs of the 2 traitors, till they yelled no more, but lifelessly hung their heads sideways, as the 2 crucified thieves are drawn. My wrist is sprained with ye, he cried at last, but there is still rope enough left for you, my fine bantam, that wouldn't give up. Take that gag from his mouth, and let us hear what he can say for himself. For a moment the exhausted mutineer made a tremulous motion of his cramped jaws, and then painfully twisting round his head, said in a sort of hiss, What I say is this, and mind it well. If ye flog me, I murder you. Say ye so? Then see how ye frighten me. And the captain drew off with the rope to strike. Best not, hissed the lakeman. But I must. and the rope was once more drawn back for the stroke. Steelkilt here hissed out something inaudible to all but the captain, who, to the amazement of all hands, started back, paced the deck rapidly 2 or 3 times, and then suddenly throwing down his rope, said, "I won't do it. Let him go. Cut him down, do you hear?" But as the junior mates were hurrying to execute the order, a pale man with a bandaged head arrested them. Radney, the chief mate. Ever since the blow, he had lain in his berth, but that morning, hearing the tumult on the deck, he had crept out and thus far had watched the whole scene. Such was the state of his mouth that he could hardly speak, but mumbling something about being willing and able to do what the captain dared not attempt, he snatched the rope and advanced to his pinioned foe. "You are a coward," hissed the lakeman. "So I am, but take that." The mate was in the very act of striking when another hiss stayed his uplifted arm. He paused, and then, pausing no more, made good his word, spite of Steelkilt's threat, whatever that might have been. The 3 men were then cut down. All hands were turned to, and sullenly worked by the moody seamen. The iron pumps clanged as before. Just after dark that day, when one watch had retired below, a clamour was heard in the forecastle, and the 2 trembling traitors running up besieged the cabin door, saying they durst not consort with the crew. Entreaties, cuffs, and kicks could not drive them back. So at their own instance they were put down in the ship's run for salvation. Still, no sign of mutiny reappeared among the rest. On the contrary, it seemed that mainly at Steelkilt's instigation they had resolved to maintain the strictest peacefulness, obey all orders to the last, and, when the ship reached port, desert her in a body. But in order to ensure the speediest end to the voyage, they all agreed to another thing, namely, not to sing out for whales, in case any should be discovered. For, spite of her leak, and spite of all her other perils, the town-ho still maintained her mastheads, and her captain was just as willing to lower for a fish that moment, as on the day his craft first struck the cruising ground, and Radney the mate was quite as ready to change his berth for a boat, and with his bandaged mouth seek to gag in death the vital jaw of the whale. But though the lakeman had induced the seamen to adopt this sort of passiveness in their conduct, he kept his own counsel, at least till all was over, concerning his own proper and private revenge upon the man who had stung him in the ventricles of his heart. He was in Radney the chief mate's watch, and, as if the infuriated man sought to run more than half-way to meet his doom, after the scene at the rigging, he insisted, against the express counsel of the captain, upon resuming the head of his watch at night. Upon this, and 1 or 2 other circumstances, Steelkilt systematically built the plan of his revenge. During the night, Radney had an unseamanlike way of sitting on the bulwarks of the quarter-deck, and leaning his arm upon the gunwale of the boat, which was hoisted up there, a little above the ship's side. In this attitude, it was well known, he sometimes dozed. There was a considerable vacancy between the boat and the ship, and down between this was the sea. Steelkilt calculated his time, and found that his next trick at the helm would come round at 2 o'clock in the morning on the 3rd day from that in which he had been betrayed. At his leisure, he employed the interval in braiding something very carefully in his watches below. "What are you making there?" said his shipmate. "What do you think? What does it look like?" "Like a lanyard for your bag, but it's an odd one, seems to me." "Yes, rather oddish," said the lakeman, holding it at arm's length before him. "But I think it will answer. Shipmate, I haven't enough twine. Have you any?" But there was none in the forecastle. "Then I must get some from old Rad," and he rose to go aft. "You don't mean to go a-begging to him," said a sailor. "Why not? Do you think he won't do me a turn, when it's to help himself in the end, shipmate?" And going to the mate, he looked at him quietly, and asked him for some twine to mend his hammock. It was given him. Neither twine nor lanyard was seen again. But the next night an iron ball, closely netted, partly rolled from the pocket of the lakeman's money jacket, as he was tucking the coat But the next night an iron ball, closely netted, partly rolled from the pocket of the lake man's money jacket, as he was tucking the coat into his hammock for a pillow. 24 hours after, his trick at the silent helm. Nigh, to the man who was apt to doze over the grave, always ready dug to the seaman's hand. That fatal hour was then to come, and in the foreordaining soul of Steelkilt, the mate was already stark and stretched as a corpse, with his forehead crushed in. And with that, we're going to actually end the episode there. So thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, or night, no matter what time of day it is. I hope you have a wonderful one of it. And as usual, we will be back tomorrow with more of The Longing. Goodbye.